welcome everyone to another episode of the Tectonic Takes podcast. I'm one of your usual hosts, Ivan Ornelas, and with me, not just his Tectonic Takes podcast debut, but his podcasting debut as well. We got one of our writers that we've brought on board for Tectonic Takes, Abel Anguiano. How are you doing?
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you do writing and anything else about your affiliation with San Jose Earthquakes.
Yeah, man. My name is Abel or Abel.
Oh,
Could
sorry.
be it could be either way. Abel is that's how you say it in Spanish.
Yeah, so I usually go by Ivan in Spanish and
Yeah,
Ivan here. So yeah, I think for the podcast, I've pretty much always been referred to as Ivan. So
yeah.
yeah, but anyway, continue.
I've been writing for a while now. I actually just graduated high school. I'm going to be starting college in the fall. I'm going to community college. I'm going to be majoring in journalism.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I've been following the earthquake since I want to say like 2014,
Okay, that's pretty good.
2015.
Yeah.
Because my main team is Chivas.
Yeah, there we go.
My parents are Mexican, so that's usually what I would watch. But I think the first time that I watched the Earthquakes was when they played Orlando City and Kaká was in the team. It was
Oh
a game
yeah.
at the Levi Stadium, and I actually went to go see Kaká, and I ended up like falling in love with the Quakes fan base. So that's kind of like when I started watching the Earthquakes.
Oh, that's cool how that worked out. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe in an alternate timeline, you'd be an Orlando City fan.
Oh man, never that.
uh, just because of Kaká. I mean, there's tons of Arsenal fans because of Thierry Henry, so you never know.
Right. You never
But
know.
anyway, yeah, so that's a pretty good amount of time to follow Earthquakes just after their most successful season since they won the MLS Cup in 2012, and then a bit of ups and downs since then. Lately, it was mostly down until, we got a pretty solid result here. Granted, it's still down in the sense that our winless streak continues. San Jose Earthquakes have gone 8 games without a win. That's 2 draws and 6 losses. However, this is a hard-fought 2-2 draw against Minnesota United in Allianz Field, and it could be the spark that San Jose Earthquakes need in a challenging and crucial month. And I'll talk a little bit more about those future fixtures later. So it's one of those matches where I think it's okay to feel either hopeful or pessimistic. How do you feel after watching that game?
Uh, you kind of like how you said you can either feel hopeful or pessimistic. I actually feel a little more hopeful because I think the effort brought in by the team was something that like lifted my spirits. It was something that I really liked. It's something that us Quakes fans have been wanting for a very long time now,
Oh yeah.
a very long time. Something clicked against Minnesota United. I don't know if you noticed that, like the backline was moving the ball very smoothly. I think there was a smoother transition to attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
So
so. Yeah, there was a lot more purpose going forward. They weren't necessarily set up as sometimes teams lower in the MLS table will be when they go on the road. Just sit back in a low block, try play for the point. San Jose Earthquakes were definitely not playing for a point. Granted, they got a point. They were playing for three, and they could have gone all three. And one thing's for sure, regardless of how you feel about this result, is that this Quakes team looks closer to getting their first win since that game against Real Salt Lake than they did a few weeks ago.
definitely. And right now, the Earthquakes have to take advantage of the fact that they're not playing anything this weekend. So there's a lot of time to prepare for the next match, which I believe is against Colorado.
Yeah. And there's even more time to prepare and also work on some things off the field, as I'm sure the search for a new general manager will continue. So on June 29th, San Jose Earthquakes announced parting ways with the general manager, Jesse Fiorinelli. No successor planned, which nothing surprised me about the way San Jose Earthquakes are run, but that seems a little bit reckless.
Yeah, I agree. Right now it's just Matias Almeyda's team, and it's him looking at the targets and pointing out potential players for the team in the future. But it's kind of like bittersweet. Right now it's just Matias Almeyda's team, and I know a lot of people would like just for Matias Almeida to make the decisions because they trust him more than anyone. but at the same time, it would be nice to have a second opinion on things.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is just becoming a situation where someone had to take the fall, and it was also the case where if you could take the shot at any number of people. You could blame Almeida, you could blame Fisher, you can blame Fiorinelli, you can blame all of them. And if you make the right decision, then it's going to be a positive change. Make the wrong decision, it could set you back further. It's rarely the case where you get rid of someone and then they make such a sweeping change of fortune. Like the exception would have been just recently how Toronto FC, they fired Chris Armas and then they really took it to New England Revolution, the top team in the Eastern Conference, and then they were just out of the gate scoring goals left and right. And no one was left wondering whether or not Chris Armas was the problem. The answer was yes, but it's going to take a bit more to change, and it's going to take a systemic change. You can switch the personnel, but if the same policy and philosophy is being put on these people to operate in the way that they have for the last several years, then we're going to be in the same position where the Quakes will be good for a time, but it'll never be sustained.
Right. And like you said, this has to do with like a systemic change. I think the Quakes can benefit from getting like a very ambitious general manager, but not so ambitious that we're just buying players left and right.
Right.
We'd have to get someone who's, just the right balance. And, I feel like Jesse Fiorinelli, like he had to adapt to a lower level league because, he came
Mhm.
from being with the top clubs in Italy, Lazio and Roma.
Yeah,
And
that's quite a different situation.
yeah, and now you're coming to the United States where soccer is a completely different level.
And the
And
expectations are different. There's no promotion or
right,
relegation.
right. So you're looking for different elements every time. And regardless of whether it's a higher level or a lower level, if you're adapting to something different, that's going to take a lot of time and it's going to take a lot of effort on your part.
Right. And it wasn't the prettiest of spells here for Fiorinelli. He led the team, or he oversaw the team while they had a 41 win, 67 loss, and 28 draw regular season record. They reached the playoffs in two seasons, 2017 and 2020. And you shared some of your thoughts here. You don't believe he gets the credit he deserves, and you pointed out a few fan favorite players they brought in.
Yeah, I mentioned like Judson and Vaco, and of course the Mexican players that were
Yeah.
recently brought in. When Vaco was playing for the Earthquakes, I actually thought he was one of the best players in MLS. Like I love watching him play. I
Yeah,
don't know if you feel
at
the same way.
times he was.
Yeah,
It's just one of those situations where, just like the San Jose Earthquakes himself, unrealized potential. It didn't always work out the way that we expected him to. There are times where he played a little bit more individualistic than team oriented, which kind of contradicts San Jose Earthquakes. More of a team focused mentality rather than having that one star player, even though we've had star players in the past, and of course Chris Wondolowski certainly qualifies as that. But when he was on his game, he was unbelievable. He was like 90 for Orlando. He was like Carlos Vela for LAFC, but he wasn't able to put it together for more than several 2 or 3 games in a row.
yeah, but just watching him play, it brought in a little more. How would I say it? Just a little bit more joy watching the Earthquakes play because
Mm-hmm.
even if Earthquakes fans went to the games expecting to drop points, you at least got a performance from one of our best players.
Yeah, and that's part of what brings people to stadiums. It's great if you're playing well and you're getting results, but when you have players that are as skilled as he is in an individual level, that's just another thing to look out for. And then other players you mentioned, like Judson, I talked about him in an article that's yet to be published for MLS Multiplex, and he is an engine with endless gas. Like he does things all over the pitch other than score consistently, but that's not his role. And he is he's a game changer in a way that like he allows other players to attack and express themselves higher up the pitch. Does a lot of dirty work, and sometimes for San Jose Earthquakes, those types of players are the ones we appreciate a bit more because we're not used to a lot of the flashier big names that teams in Florida or New York or Southern California get. But that's just how it goes. And I think it wasn't all failure for Fiorinelli, of course not. It wasn't obviously successful either. The truth will lie somewhere in the middle, and we'll see in the next coming weeks or so who ends up taking a spot.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about the international football as well as, you know, not just in CONCACAF, but elsewhere.
Yep.
So with the Gold Cup roster, U.S. men's national team, Greg Berhalter selected Jackson Ewell. He saw enough of him in the CONCACAF Nations League where it wasn't his best performance, but he wants to give him another chance. And also, you're not bringing in a lot of the top players like the Pulisics or McKinney's. So he's up there with the experience in terms of, he's seen some minutes at the senior level. He was one of the leaders of the Olympic team. Kate Cowell, unfortunately, wasn't left out, which I'll chalk it up to. He's still very young. He's been in and out of the lineup for San Jose Earthquakes, and the USA have plenty of talent just from MLS alone to choose from for this type of tournament. So it's just a tough break for Kate Cowell, but he'll get his chance again.
I think he'll get his chance in the future. He's still very young.
Right. So I'm not going to lose too much sleep over that. And U.S. men's national team's loss, of course, the San Jose Earthquakes gain. It would have been tough to be without both of them. So, it's nice to have at least one of them. And despite Marcos Lopez having a decent tournament with Peru, Peru made it to the semifinals of the Copa America. He did get injured again, so that's unfortunate. That's just the one thing holding Marcos Lopez back, is if he can stay healthy for a consistent amount of time, he can excel for club and country.
Yeah, I agree. And it's good that he's gaining like a international reputation now.
Right.
And not just with Quakes fans. So it's good for San Jose Earthquakes as a brand as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully that like expands the team in all aspects.
Right. And we saw it throughout the tournaments this summer that in Europe and South America, at least the mid to lower tier nations aren't shying away from MLS players, that they know the quality that they bring. It's unrealistic to expect, say, Jonathan Bond, the English goalkeeper from LA Galaxy, to be called up for England, but it's for other nations, like they're looking far and wide for players, and they're not overlooking MLS, which is always good. And that's a good sign for players that are considering transferring to MLS in the future.
Yeah, and I think it was actually really smart of the U.S. men's national team to put a B team, as you would say, in the Gold Cup, because it gives a lot more exposure to MLS talent.
Yeah, it gives more exposure to MLS talent, and there's no shortage of exposure throughout the Gold Cup rosters. A lot of CONCACAF nations have at least a couple players in MLS or lower divisions in the United States and Canada. And I think it's also going to be important for the U.S. men's national team because there's no such thing as a shortage of depth. You need options because whether you're doing a World Cup qualifier in September or a friendly in March or whatever the case may be, like some players may not be available for whatever reason. So the more options you can have, the better, while still developing a core that you can build on to take into battle when the going gets tough for the important World Cup qualifiers and hopefully the World Cup itself.
Yeah, definitely.
And lastly, with Euro 2020 and Copa America wrapping up, we got our final set up. Brazil versus Argentina will play tomorrow as we're recording on Friday. They play Saturday. Italy versus England plays Sunday. And then after that, we go into Gold Cup and the Olympic tournaments. Focusing just on the Euro 2020 Copa America, what would your predictions be for the finals? And do you have any other thoughts on those tournaments?
First, let me just say that I'm so glad that these are not happening at the same time.
Yeah. On the same day, it might be a little too much even then.
Yeah. Definitely them being on different days is gonna be a little refreshing for my feed.
Yeah.
On Twitter and Instagram. But if I had to make predictions right now, I have a feeling about Argentina this year.
You think Messi's finally gonna get it done at the senior level?
I the way I saw him after that win against Colombia, that's that inspired Messi that a lot of people like to see.
Hmm.
I have a feeling about this Argentina side, even though it might not be like at the level of that team from 2014 that reached the World Cup final. But it's still being led by Messi. You have a great goalkeeper. You have great talent. You still have Angel Di Maria. He even at his age, he's still putting up performances as if he was like 25 and playing at Real Madrid.
And I thought going into this, if Brazil versus Argentina was going to be the final, I thought Brazil would have a massive advantage in the goalkeeping department because Ederson plays for Manchester City, Allison plays for Liverpool. But, Emi Martinez of Aston Villa, he had a terrific penalty shootout against Colombia. And more so than the saves, he gained a lot of respect / attention for, the way he was just getting in people's heads. I even tweeted out that not since Quincy Amarikwa, shout out to former podcast guest and Earthquakes player, has someone got successfully gone into someone else's head as Emiliano Martinez. Just to
Yeah,
reference Quincy's favorite quote there.
yeah. He as a goalkeeper, he's just so like he's a character that you want on your team. Look beyond the abilities, just the way he is as a person. It really reflects in his goalkeeping abilities, and you saw that in the penalty shootout against Colombia.
Yeah, I saw that, and I'm sure a lot of people will be taking notice. Aston Villa, they've done a good job of holding on to some of their players like him and Jack Grealish, but we'll see how long that can last based on their international tournaments. Before the tournament, I had, unimaginatively Brazil winning it all, and I haven't seen anything that would dissuade me from it as much as I would want Lionel Messi to win something with Argentina. I think Brazil, they're also a very talented and complete team. And Neymar is taking this tournament seriously. He's not, you know, there's always going to be a few diving incidents here and there with Neymar, but he's also being very dangerous and a threat going forward. Dare I say he's been more focused for Brazil this tournament than at times for PSG in the last couple of seasons, which might surprise people. And if my friend Kevin, who's a PSG fan, is watching this podcast, sorry, not sorry. But I think Brazil will still edge it out. I think it'll be close. Probably could go to extra time or penalties, but I think Brazil will edge it out against Argentina. I think for Italy versus England, it's coming home or it's coming Rome. I'm going to pick Rome here. I think Italy have been a little bit more consistent in this tournament. I think England, there's always that feeling like the rug's going to get pulled from underneath them some way, somehow. And it wasn't by Croatia this time or Denmark in this case in the semifinals as it was in the World Cup. I think Italy have the game plan to stop England in their tracks. They're very defensively solid, which is going to be important against Raheem Sterling and Harry Kane. And I think Italy will get back to where they feel like they belong, winning their first tournament since 2006. Your thoughts?
I'm also going to be backing Italy. I feel like most of the world is going to be backing Italy because of uh,
The
controversial
dive.
calls. Yes, we'll just
Mm.
we'll just leave it at that. But also just England. I'm a big critic of Gareth Southgate.
Oh, really?
Um,
Even
I
still?
still one thing I do admire is his flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
because we saw his lineups completely change from one match day to the other. And against Germany, he used a line of three, and it worked somehow. And against Denmark, you saw like a more complete team, I guess you
Yeah.
could say. Like
More of their usual 4-2-3-1.
yeah. And against Ukraine, I guess Southgate finally figured it out. That
Against Ukraine, of course, but
against
still.
Ukraine, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But when you have a balanced midfield, like you have Rice, Phillips, and then Mason Mount, it's very balanced. You have Rice taking on the defensive duties, although Mount isn't afraid to get defensive work done either. You have Phillips, who's a great box-to-box midfielder, and then
Yeah.
Mason Mount, easing in that transition to the attack. If England were to play like that the entire tournament, then I would favor them by a little more.
Mhm.
But to me, just the way that Italy has been, very strong defensively, and just that passion that we see from them, I feel like they're gonna take it.
Right. And there's no denying England, of course, they've made good use of having their home stadium for much of this tournament in Wembley. They're undefeated in this tournament, and they played mostly in Wembley, barring that one game in Rome against Ukraine. And I think they're going to be very tough. I think if this is the team that finally gets it done since 1966, it could be this England team, but I think Italy is just a little bit uh, stronger at this time. So we'll see how that goes. And we'll now talk a little bit about the Minnesota United versus San Jose Earthquakes game, the most recent outing here in Allianz Field in St. Paul. It was a 2-2 road draw. And these are the lineups. So for Minnesota United, we had Tyler Miller in goal. We had fresh from the Euros, Yuka Ratila, Michael Boxall, Bakaya Dibasi, Chase Gasper as their back line. And they had a front six, and then their midfield four. The wingers were Nico Hansen and Franco Fragapan, and Will Trapp and Hassan Dotson in the center, with Adrian Huno and Emmanuel Reynoso as their forwards, both of them DPs. And their third DP, Jan Gregus, came off the bench along with Osvaldo Alonso, Ramon Avila, and Brent Kallman, and also lastly, DJ Taylor. Their previous result was a 1-0 win over the Portland Timbers at Providence Park. The changes for that game, the only major change was Malagasy, that's from Madagascar, right back Roman Metanir was still pending his U.S. green card paperwork. He returned home to France where his family's at, but he hasn't been able to return to the country yet. So Yuka Ratila is back in filling for that spot. So this is the Minnesota team that it's had a few changes since their run to the MLS Cup semifinals last season, and they also made it as far in the MLS's back tournament. The big change, of course, being Franco Fragapan. They signed him a couple months ago, and what do you think? Like, uh, they've been a little underperforming to start this season, a little bit lower than many expected.
I think Minnesota United they definitely have the talent. Um, I feel like their problem is a little similar to the Earthquakes in terms of like consistency.
Yeah.
So I feel like if they could just keep a solid lineup and continue to play, how they played against they played the second half against the Earthquakes, and they have a shot at being one of the most solid teams out there. But to me, Minnesota has always been a solid team.
Yeah.
They're just going through like some inconsistency.
Yeah. I think during the start of their existence, I think Quakes couldn't stop beating Minnesota. And then shortly after we made the playoffs in 2017, some sort of a rebuild took place. And then Minnesota United have been one of the most successful teams against the San Jose Earthquakes. So it's been a bit of an unfun role reversal that continued this game, with them walking away without a defeat there. But Quakes keep chugging along and trying to crack Minnesota. I feel like that's the benchmark right now. If we can compete with a team like Minnesota United, then we're in decent shape to get to where we want to be in this postseason. Of course, it's going to take a long time to, a lot of effort to make up the lost ground from this year. So anyway, Quick's lineup was JT Marcinkowski in goal, Judson at right back, Nathan making his debut from Zurich in center back alongside Osvaldo Alanis, Tanner Beeson at left back, Eric Remedy in the holding midfield spot. It's a 4-1-4-1. Christian Espinoza and Shea Salinas on the wings, Chofis Lopez and Jackson Ewell in the middle of the park, and Kate Cowell up top. And then we saw Chris Wondolowski, Indy Rios, Paul Marie, Siad Haji, and crucially, Benji Kikanovich from the bench. There was a lot of changes from their lineup in the 3-1 loss to LA Galaxy. So you might need a whiteboard for this, but I'm going to try to go through it as best I can. Judson slid from center mid to right back spot. Paul Marie dropped to the bench. And then, of course, Nathan made his debut, so no room for Flo. Tanner Beeson moved to left back, which pushed Selena up to the left side. Espinoza switched wings. And then Chofis went central, and then Cal ahead of Wondolowski starting up top. So what do you think inspired all these changes?
This lineup is fascinating to me. This is one of the
Yeah.
things that I love about Matias Almeyda is that he
Yeah,
can pull
me
off something
too.
like this. Like who else can pull off something like this? Judson from center mid to right back, bro. Who
Yeah.
does that? You know, and it worked. That's the best thing. It worked. When there was space in front of Judson, he took it up. He was being very involved in the plays. Nathan, I love Nathan. Like
Yeah, I think he's going to be a good player for us if his debut is anything to go by. It was mostly positive. Almeida commended his work rate, and he was considering subbing him off around the 70th minute mark. But Nathan just kept going, and he was raring to go. And sometimes with coaches, if they think you're tired, like it doesn't matter what you do, like you're getting subbed off. But that's a good sign of a relationship between a new player and the head coach, and it breeds confidence in the player and in the fans that okay, this is a worthwhile signing. It's our last signing from Switzerland. He was a Swiss player, Francois Falter. He was more of a bit part player. He didn't play week in week out, and as much as I've enjoyed seeing Flo play for the Earthquakes as a regular starter. If this is what we're going to get from Nathan, I think Nathan and Osvaldo Alanis could be the preferred partnership going forward.
Yeah, I think we should definitely roll with Nathan and Alanis as our center backs. The moment I saw Nathan celebrate a tackle like if it were a goal in the last minute of the game.
It was unfortunate for them, and you never want to see someone go out like that. So, and fortunately for them, his substitute, Coleman, he scored the equalizer for them. He was able to score in the 45th minute +4 in stoppage time of the first half. And that's just typical Quakes, right? Like, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Like, you just have to close out the half, but that seemed a little bit too much in this occasion.
Yeah, and it seemed like such an unreasonable goal as well. He
Right,
didn't have much of an angle, so you would expect the defender. I think it was Beeson who was on him, right?
right. It
I think
was
it was
Tanner
Tanner
Beeson.
Beeson. You would expect him to close him off and shut off any angle that he had. But I guess he thought that the angle was just not enough anyways. So, but it ended
Yeah.
up going in, and that's what we don't want to see. We want to see effort 100% throughout the entire game.
Right. And this is why Beeson, he's been starting a lot more than a lot of Quakes fans expected him to in his young professional career. And at times he stepped up to the plate, but other times this is a reminder that, it's okay if he's not ready to be a week in, week out starter. And he doesn't need to be once we're all healthy and figured out that situation. But it was an unfortunate goal, and it sucked the air out of Quakes. And it's been one of those seasons where you're just taking punch after punch, and you're trying and scrapping to get back on the win column, and that just can be demoralizing. But with an Almeida-led team, like he's going to keep them motivated. But even after the second goal, might have been tough. So Judson does a lot of good work here, but Mon Abila, he cashes in on the penalty Judson conceded, and JT initially saved it, but Abila scored the rebound. And it was a sequence much like how Harry Kane scored the decisive goal for England against Kasper Schmeichel.
Yeah, it was like they were basically mirror images of each other.
Yeah,
It was kind of disappointing.
right. I was almost as disappointed for Denmark as I was for the Sounds Earthquakes.
Right, I was rooting for Denmark all the way. That penalty was heartbreaking, not gonna lie.
Yeah, and both the goals here coming from the substitutions. So Adrian Heath pushing the right buttons, even if one of those substitutions was forced from an injury, to get Minnesota in a position where they could take all 3 points and start to get themselves where they want to be in the table. Like, they don't want to be slumming it down here. They believe that they can be one of the best teams in MLS, and they were down the stretch last season. Lastly, though, and we're not saving the least for last, definitely the best for last. Benji Kikanovic, our sub, has his opportunity to make his mark with an assist from Shea Salinas to equalize, and it was brilliant individual effort from Benji Kikanovic, probably the most skilled goal from the Quakes this season.
Yeah, and we also like seeing Salinas getting involved with the goal. I think Salinas has been one of our most consistent players, and
Yeah,
it's great seeing him connect with Benji. It's like how would I say? It's kind of like passing the torch, like
right.
from experience to our youth. It was something that I really like seeing because that means that our entire team, regardless of our age, uh, we're getting along really well, and there's chemistry there. We
Mm-hmm.
just have to keep exercising it.
Yeah, and even though Shea Salinas is from Lubbock, Texas, he's done so much for the San Jose Earthquakes that he's essentially a Bay Area guy, and he sets it up for the latest Bay Area native Quakes in Kikanovic. And being a striker and being from the Bay Area, that tended to work out well with Chris Wondolowski. So we're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves, but Kikanovic definitely earned man of the match for this game, I think, because that was a crucial involvement and it showed what he can do. He stepped up in a big moment, which is not easy to do in your first season.
It was a very poetic moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it was the antithesis of most goals we're accustomed to. When you think of a Quakes goal, you go down the list, it's like, okay, they probably score from a set piece or maybe from a counterattack or some
Yeah,
other scrappy Hail Mary situation that Wando cashed in a large percentage of his all-time goals tally from. But this kind of goal is pretty nice. In terms of skill, like the closest comparison, and this goal is probably better, to be honest, but it's still a nice goal. It reminded me of Shea Salinas' winner against Vancouver Whitecaps last year in MLS is back.
yeah, it was like a good individual effort. That was a really good game. But yeah, uh, it's good that we are seeing um, Benji and Salinas working together, and Salinas using his experience. In this game it was reflective of the things that he's done in the past.
Yep, and Minnesota United will probably have a bitter taste in their mouth from that result there, but it's still a long MLS season. Like, teams are playing anywhere from like 11 to 13 games at this point, somewhere along those lines off the top of my head. Um, and that means there's still 20 odd more games to go, but still we're starting to feel it. We're like, tables are starting to form into the shape that we expect it to be for the remainder of the season. There's still a lot of movement possible, but getting points on the road is essential, and that's what the Quakes did. You just gotta find a way to get 3 points soon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was quite literally a point to prove that the Quakes aren't a dumpster fire, which is great to know.
We love that.
Yeah. And lastly, do you have any other thoughts on the game? Do you have another player you want to nominate for man of the match, or you just gonna go with Benji?
And we can go with Benji, but I also like Judson in the first half.
Yeah,
He was
Judson in the first
everywhere.
half. He was a great contributor in the first half. He had a shot in the first half, and Judson doesn't do the best shooting. So when he has a good shot, it's something that sticks in my mind. We're like, oh wow, Judson, look at you. You're having a pretty complete performance this game.
Yep.
It didn't quite follow up in the second half, but Judson remains one of this team's most important players, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree.
Fantasy League update. Abel, do you play MLS Fantasy?
I actually don't.
Well, we'll get you into it next season.
All
But
right.
for this year, uh, we're well underway with our league here at the Tectonic Takes podcast. We have Soccer Gods in the lead with a points scored lead. That appears to be the first tiebreaker. So the most fantasy points scored. If you have the same record as someone, you're going to be higher than or lower than those people respectively. But Soccer Gods and What a Wonderful World both have 10-1 records. I'm part of that chase back, consisting of 4 teams with 9-2 records. It's getting tricky with these double weeks, so keep on checking your week keep on checking your teams every couple of days just to make sure that like you're staying on top of the MLS schedule. If a player gets suspended, sub them out, all that good stuff. It's really fun, but it can be a little tough to keep up. So I completely understand. So now we're going to go with the standings. This is as of July 8th's games. In the Western Conference, we have Seattle Sounders in first, followed by Sporting Kansas City, LA Galaxy, Colorado Rapids, LAFC, Real Salt Lake, and Minnesota United in your top 7 in the playoff spots. So that point that Minnesota United earned from San Jose Earthquakes is keeping them ahead of 8th place Houston Dynamo on goal difference. And then behind Houston Dynamo, we have Portland Timbers and Austin with 13 points each. Up next is San Jose Earthquakes with 11 points and -8 goal difference. That's second worst in the conference. So I'm going to keep on working on that, hopefully. 12th is FC Dallas. Wait, that can't be right. Maybe. Head to head is also a tiebreaker. San Jose Earthquakes did beat FC Dallas, so that's why we're ahead of them. And Vancouver Whitecaps in dead last with 9 points. So, what are your thoughts on the standings here for the Western Conference?
I think, they're pretty. How would I say?
What you expected?
Yeah, like what you expect. Like the Earthquakes, they haven't been the worst team, but they're definitely, in that bottom bunch of teams.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't complain because you've lost so many games. So that's just how it works out, But
I'm a little surprised that the Portland Timbers are in 9th. I expected them to be well above the playoff line this year.
Yeah, when you look at the Portland Timbers these last few seasons, other than winning the MLS's back tournament, they've somewhat been underachieving. And it sucks because you want to see Diego Valeri, who's been probably the best player in the 10-year or so history of the Portland Timbers in MLS. You want to see them, go out challenging for some sort of silverware. Granted, not at the Quakes' expense, but you want to see them better than what they're doing now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would probably be the big surprise here. And I think, right now the Quakes are 4 points off the Western Conference, and you're not going to make that gap up easily just by picking 1 point up at a time. So the sooner the Quakes can get on the win column, the better. I know I sound like a broken record, but that's just the reality of the situation. Eastern Conference, though, New England Revolution, despite that aforementioned shock loss to Toronto, they're on top still with 24 points.
Hold on, Ivan. I think my phone is ringing. I'm sorry.
All right, let me pause. And in the Eastern Conference, despite that loss to Toronto, New England Revolution is at the top of the East with 24 points, followed by Orlando, Philadelphia Union, Montreal, and Nashville tied in 19th, 4th, and 5th. Tied with 19 points in 4th and 5th. NYC and New York Red Bulls, the 2 New York teams rounding up the playoff spots out east. Just below them, though, you have both DC United and Columbus in 16 points. And then the rest playing catch-up, Atlanta United, Chicago Fire, Cincinnati. And unfortunately, Inter Miami and Toronto both have 8 points. I mean, those 3 points, you're starting to dig yourself out of that hole, Toronto, but still some work to do as well. And we talked about in previous podcasts, every time we go through the standings, that Inter Miami are a mess.
They're not the team that people expected it to be. People expected it to be like another LAFC, like a superstar team that is always like favorites. It's not been the case at all for Inter Miami.
Yeah, I was a little bit skeptical, but even I thought that like eventually the talent would pay off for them. But so far it's been like they're the QPR of this league. If you remember, this was a little bit before, you're a Quakes fan, but in like 2012, 2013, QPR were promoted from the championship, and they spent a lot of money on players from other big clubs in England and stuff. They had Julio Cesar for a time, the Brazilian goalkeeper, and they thought, oh wow, they got all these great players, even though a lot of them were at the end or past their primes, that they should definitely step up, if not, be mid-table. But no, they've gotten relegated. And, that type of transfer policy, it doesn't always work out. It's more, there's more to soccer than just the talent on the field, and games aren't won on paper. But you also mentioned, I think, before we started recording, that Nashville continues to do well.
Yeah, and even, you can say whatever you want about Nashville and them drawing literally every other game,
Yeah.
but I'm really surprised at how Nashville has like solidified itself, not only as like a team with a good audience in at its games, like a good fan base, but they just play really, really well. And I'm actually really happy to see them at fifth because they're kind of what an expansion team is supposed to be like. It is not
Yeah.
supposed to be like this. It's not a superstar team like Inter Miami. This is a team that is rooted in its fans, and I think that's probably why they're doing so well.
Yeah, and I think that they should be proud. Another team that I'm proud of, as well as their fans certainly are, Montreal Impact. A lot of people, including some of my friends over at the MLS Multiplex podcast, thought that Montreal would finish near the bottom or at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, but they've been very solid under a first-year head coach. So good for them. And lastly, before we get into fan questions, we're going to talk about the upcoming schedule for the Quakes for the month of July. So, as you mentioned earlier, Bill, Colorado Rapids, 6 p.m., July 17th is our next game. So, a week from tomorrow, as we record. And then we have a bit of a busy week where 4 days later, we go to Kansas City to play against them. 3 days later, we go home to Houston Dynamo. Perhaps a bit of revenge is in order for that opening week loss. And we end the month, July 31st, at Seattle Sounders at 2 p.m. So it's going to be a tough run of fixtures there.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be like the ultimate test for Matias Almeyda, in terms of like the team depth and his flexibility. Uh, we're gonna see just how much creativity he has. Because we're facing off against very different teams. So we're gonna see if what we saw against Minnesota can transfer into our games against Colorado, Kansas, and Seattle.
Yep. And Dynamo and Kansas City are two teams that have beaten the Quakes already this season. Rapids and Sounders had heavy victories over the Quakes last season. So this is not just revenge. This is a measuring stick to see how much, if at all, this team truly has improved.
Yeah.
All right. So now we get into some fan questions. Thank you to all our fans who submitted questions, whether it be from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Discord. There's so many ways to be involved with the Tectonic Takes podcast. So I encourage you to follow us on those platforms, and you'll be able to send us questions fairly easily. We'll start with Nico Gonzalez. Do you think we should be giving Benji more playing time at the risk of Wando playing less? Wando's age is showing we have really nothing to lose as Kate continues to develop. So for me, I think since we know for sure Chris Wondolowski is not playing another season, barring an unlikely change of heart, I think you do have to have some sort of plan for the future while you're trying to have success in this season, because we don't want Chris Wondolowski to finish his MLS career not making the playoffs. That would be a worst case scenario. Would there be a way? I don't think it necessarily has to be at the expense of Chris Wondolowski's playing time as a striker. I think if Wondolowski, Benji, and Kate Cowell are your main three striker forward options, you can try to work Andy Rios in there. And unfortunately, you do have to kind of work him in there because regardless of whether he's playing well or not, you paid all this money. So it's kind of one of those things where like you're trying to get back some of that investment. Andy Rios can play as a 10. He can play on the wing. So that'd be how I'd manage the situation. Do you think of another idea?
I mean, pretty similar to what you think. It's now or never for Benji because it's going to be pretty hard to adapt to a team where you have to be like the starter or the second
Yeah.
option. So I think like a rotation with Wando, Cade, and Benji, it would definitely work.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
Yeah.
Quakes, even if you were to play one of those three players like every single game, even though Wondolowski is a guaranteed goal at his best, it's not likely you're going to be challenging for the Golden Boot, which is fine. That's not the goal here. You want to
Mhm.
have the best possible team and best possible combination. And maybe you need that 1, 2, 3 punch that all of them have been able to offer this season.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So I'll let you tackle this next one from Onik Rusinov. What do you think of the impact made by the young players? Do they deserve more playing time?
I think the impact has been satisfactory
Mm-hmm.
from what we've seen from Cade Cowell. He's our top scorer, and he's also like tied for top assister for us, I believe, at 3. Uh, so yeah, I totally deserve that they're getting. They deserve more playing time. It comes back to like what we were talking about, like rotations and uh, you know, letting the young players be like the third string options as we are getting ready to transition into a new era. With players reaching like retirement age. I mean, I guess we could see more playing time from, Benji, uh, and we would also like to see some movement in the academy. Uh, but I feel like the impact has been fine so far.
Yep, I think so too. I think you have Cade Cowell being like the main star of this new generation of Quakes players, and rightfully so. But it's not just him. I think Tanner Beeson, his contributions have been important. Like if Tanner Beeson hasn't been able to play overall as well as he has, they'd be very thin at the defensive end of the depth chart. And you have players like Siad Haji, who has been impactful this season, but still working out some kinks in his game as well. And of course, we hope to see more Benji after that game. Next, we have Doug Houston. He asked several questions. I'm going to focus on just two here. Why did Matias take Cade out so early? And will management contact Johnny Moore for the GM position? And even though I am a diehard Quakes fan, I must admit, like, there's a certain point of my Quakes fandom where like it becomes a blank. So I had to look up Johnny Moore, and it appears that he was the San Jose Earthquakes general manager from 2002 2003.
Yep.
And being a Raiders fan and seeing how the John Gruden experience is going, plucking someone who was good at their job from 2002 into this decade isn't always the best decision. So we'll have to see who ends up getting the GM position. But the more important question right now, it was something that I asked myself. Cade Cowell should not have been subbed off at least as early as he was. I think Cade Cowell, he brings energy consistently, and I think it's unfortunate that he rarely plays a full 90, whether he's starting or not.
Yeah. Uh, in a recent article that I sent to Fabian last night for our early access for our Patreon listeners about Matias Almeyda, I wrote about Matias's decisions and why he does the things that he does. I don't really agree with what he did in that Minnesota game, taking Cade out so early, but he sees things that we don't,
Right.
and that's the bottom line. He sees
Yeah.
things that we don't, and we can't really argue with that.
Yeah. And lastly, from Trevor Woshik, heard there was going to be finally some movement on a training facility before the whole Jesse thing happens. Wonder if that is currently. And to my knowledge, like these sorts of things, like the Quakes personnel, they decide what to let us know when they feel like it. Um, I feel like as far as the training facility goes, that's essentially a key part of any successful MLS team or any successful team in general. So that should be a priority to continue to renovate facilities for a modern soccer club. Have you heard anything on that front?
I This is news to me.
Yeah.
I know that there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter about the Earthquakes falling behind in terms of infrastructure. Looking at all these teams create new stadiums like Columbus,
Yep.
uh,
Austin.
yeah, Austin. Uh, it's definitely a discussion for a future episode.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's something we'll look into.
uh, but I have not heard anything about a new training facility.
Right. So that is a bit reassuring for me because I pride myself in doing like my due research before the podcast. And if I can't find information on something, I hope that's been the case for other people.
Yeah,
uh, so,
don't
and
worry.
last,
I also had to look up Johnny Moore.
yeah, lastly, we have some questions from Instagram. We do a lot of fun stuff on Twitter, but as well as Instagram. So be sure to check out that account too if you haven't. All our links will be on our podcast description, so don't worry about being unable to find us. So, unfortunately, though, with Instagram, it appears like we can't see who sent these questions. So, for you Instagram question senders, feel free to DM us with and to claim credit for questions in the future. What do Quakes need in a new general manager? And I believe the Quakes need someone who is in tune with the trends of MLS as it is in 2021. And that doesn't mean you're copying people for the sake of copying them. That's not how you succeed in this league, because you do have to make up some differential by doing something different. But if you're doing something completely different, or you're not doing enough as other people, and the gap widens, then you're failing as a general manager. So we need someone, and whether or not Jesse Farinelli, that describes him in his philosophy, uh, that can be debated, but someone who is going to be, talking to the ownership and other people providing funds for these transfers and showing that fire, that ambition nature that can inspire them to feel the same way.
Yeah, I think I actually mentioned this earlier. That the Earthquakes in a general manager, they need someone who knows the right balance uh, of ambition. So hopefully, once we actually get our general manager, uh, they find someone who, like you said, is up to date with MLS trends in terms
Yeah,
of transferring and all that, because you don't want to fall behind all the other teams. I mean, we're
yeah,
already behind on infrastructure.
yeah,
You don't want to fall behind on transfers and all of that.
yeah.
So yeah,
All right. And our next question from Instagram: what should our attacking line look like moving forward? So let's think about the next game against Colorado Rapids. And let's think about the front four. So the attacking midfielder, the wingers, and the striker. Who would you start?
I would start Trophies as like a center forward or center attacking mid position. And I like having Christian Espinoza on the right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to try Shea Salinas again at left mid, and at striker. Why not give some confidence to Andy Rios?
That's that's a tectonic take there. I think
That's a
some
very
people
tectonic
will
take.
feel as they're listening to this podcast. Um, I think what I would do, my policy here, since we're relying in relatively equal amounts right now to Wondolowski, Cowell, and now Kikanovich to provide some of that offensive spark, I want to ride that hot hand. So I want Kikanovich to get a start for the next game. I want Shea Salinas as well. I think, as you mentioned, he's one of their most consistent players this season. I want Espinoza on the right side. And then in attacking midfield, that's a tough one. It could be, I mean, Jackson Ewell could play further up, but he often plays as a center mid, unless Utzen and Remedy are the CDMs and you move Ewell up top. But most likely Ewell's going to be a CM, so I'm not going to include him. Let's give Chofis another chance at the 10.
Yeah. I actually really like him leading the attack. Uh, not as a striker, but I feel like the energy is there and the ideas are there. He just has to find a way to get those onto the pitch.
Yeah, and we wait and see what Carlos Fierro can do when he gets his next opportunity. I'm trying to remember if he had an injury or something that he hasn't been appearing. That might be the case, but I'm drawing a blank right now. Uh, Unfortunately, my notes are 99% comprehensive. This would be the 1%.
Yeah.
And another player who didn't get brought up in that last question, and this will be our last fan question from Instagram. And we also have a couple from our riders, including yourself, Abel. We'll get into that. So for the Instagram question, why doesn't Haji play more? And I think this is an example, with all due respect to Haji, why he doesn't play more, why he's probably better off on the bench for the time being, because he needs to improve his decision-making process. And this is something that we saw a little bit with Vaco while he was a Quake, that we see the talent, but you also have to apply it with the right decision-making process, like knowing when to challenge players, knowing when to make the pass, knowing when to take the shot. And I think that's the next step for Haji.
Yeah, and it's a problem that you find with a lot of players who have individual abilities
Mm-hmm.
and players who are very skilled at one-on-ones. Uh, it's just a matter of maturity for me. I would love to see Haji play more. I think he's an incredible talent, but just that level of maturity isn't there yet.
You're right. And this was a question that you submitted before, we decided that you were going to be on this podcast as Favi continues to work on some of his stuff in Japan. But you mentioned that the strikerless system with Chofis as a lead in the attack actually works well. Uh, why do you think that's the case?
I think that's kind of the case because when Chofis has someone in front of him, I feel like he feels pressure to move forward with him. But when you're given the space to move around more freely, you find players on the flanks. Uh, like you can find Christian Espinosa, and look how that turned out. He
Yeah.
found Kate Cowell. The ball was in the back of the net. So it's not like exactly a strikerless system because how I mentioned my attacking line moving forward. It doesn't have to be Andy Rios, but if you have like Cade Cowell there, um, and you have trophies just kind of like dictating where everyone is going, it brings out his personality, it brings out his creativity, and I feel like that's what the Earthquakes need right now.
Yeah, I think any sort of creativity is always a welcome addition to the Quake's attack moving forward. I accidentally skipped over this one Instagram question. What should we be looking forward to? I kind of want to skip the next season already. I think while there were some moments of calamity in this game against Minnesota United with the way we conceded those 2 goals, there's a lot of positive signs as well on both ends of the field. So I think you keep watching this season, because this, at least for this next month, because that'll tell you what kind of Quakes team this really is and what to expect going forward. If we don't win any of the next 4 games, then I completely understand if you want to check out for a little bit. But I think there's enough to be impressed by this Quakes team and hope that they'll win a game soon.
Yeah. Just to answer that question with one word, youth. We
Yes,
have
there you go.
Cowell, we have Haji, we have like so many young players. That should be enough, honestly.
And on the other end of the spectrum, like, this is Wondolowski's last season. So as
Yeah,
much as it can get ugly at times, like, it's going to be worth watching him as long as we have him.
yeah.
And lastly, from another one of our new writers here at the Tectonic Takes, Matt Dobner. JT made a good play on the penalty kick last night. It's great to see him guess right and get a save, although he didn't secure the ball and Ramon Avila was able to cash in on the rebound. I think, you know, every goalkeeper is hard on themselves when they spill a penalty and allow it to be scored, or in a penalty shootout situation, they get a hand on it but can't keep it out. But I think for the positive is that JT Marsikowski is still proving like he is the right man for the job between the sticks.
Yeah. And I think we're also at the point, us Earthquakes fans, where anything positive, we like to make a note of it.
Yeah.
JT making a good play on the PK. for a team that's really informed, that could be anything. But for
Yeah.
us, that's a sign of just having energy for the game and being your mind being in the moment.
One team this organization and these players have in spades, mostly the players, like, the organization itself is what it is resilience. And
Yeah.
that's what JT Marcinkowski showed just by saving that initial penalty, and just from how he's carried himself in this season. It's been tougher on him than he expected. I think he was hoping that he would continue to trend completely upward, but that's not always the case. And for a goalkeeper, he's still pretty young too, so he's got plenty of years ahead of him as well.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so thanks to our sponsor, Roughneck Scarves, official scarf supplier to MLS, USL, and US Soccer. Get custom scarves for your group, team, or at roughneckscarves.com. If you're tired of the same old uniforms and cookie cutter templates from Nike and Adidas and want to supply a completely custom kit for your youth club, Sunday league squad, adult, or pro team, Icarus FC can help you create the kit of your dreams at an affordable price. Let them help you design your new custom kit today at icarusfc.com. And as our team at Tectonic Takes continues to grow, the motivation to take Icarus FC up on that offer only grows further and further. Thank you again, Abel, for being able to fill in and join us on this podcast. I look forward to having you again in the future. What are your closing thoughts?
The Earthquakes, I feel after this game against Minnesota, we're back on the right track. It's just a matter of how long can we stay on it.
Yeah, and I think we'll find out not this Saturday, July 10th, but a week from then when they take on the Colorado Rapids. Go Quakes!